Hey, how are you guys doing today? Welcome to the 7th week of our life group online. Here at the Arnold House, we've had a really good week this week. Our schedule finally seems to be falling into place, which we're thankful for. It's finally given us a little bit of an opportunity to have some family time each night, which we were really missing out. And this past week, we actually took advantage of one of those nights together and had a family movie night. So we watched the new movie Trolls World Tour. And for those of you parents that have kids out there, I'm sure you've heard of it, and it actually was a pretty cute movie. It was really fun getting to watch Miriam dance around and sing all the songs in the movie. So that was a really good time for us together as a family. And talking about that, it brings me to our question of the day. So our question today is, what's your favorite movie? And that can either be your favorite movie of all time or a movie that you've seen recently and really enjoyed. But feel free to share your answer to that question down in the comments below. I look forward to getting to hear from you guys and hear some of your all's favorite movies. Miriam, her favorite movie is Frozen. She loves the old one and the new one. Some of my favorite movies are the Lord of the Rings movies. And Kirsten, she really likes Forrest Gump. So we're really looking forward to see what some of your all's favorite movies are and get to know each other a little bit better. So thinking about our time together here in our life group online, it's crazy to think that it's already been 7 weeks that we've been meeting together online. And I know we all would rather be together in person, getting to study God's Word together. But I'm thankful for the opportunity, thanks to technology, to be able to still meet together and study God's Word here online. So it's been really exciting to get to learn from each other, even while we're unable to be together in person. And let's take just a quick minute to do a recap of where we've been in our time together over the last couple weeks. So over the last few weeks, we've been looking at the life of Abram. We saw God make a covenant with him and even change his name to Abraham. And we saw God provide the long-awaited son, Isaac, to fulfill his covenant with Abraham. And then last week in our time together, we looked in on the life of Jacob, Abraham's grandson. And we saw that him and his brother Esau had a little bit of a rocky relationship in the beginning. But then we see Jacob had a unique encounter with the Lord. We spent most of our time last week walking through a passage that talked about Jacob wrestling with the Lord. And it's at this point in Jacob's life we see that some things have changed. You know, in the beginning, his life was full of deception and kind of things that aren't typically, quote unquote, good. But we see that at this point in Jacob's life, he really is trusting in the Lord and he's seeking to be blessed by God. And in this exchange, this wrestling match, we see that Jacob acknowledges that his blessings come from the Lord. So much so that he continues to beg for the Lord to bless him. And it's in this encounter that we see that God takes the opportunity to change Jacob's name. He changes his name to Israel and just confirms that the covenant promise that he made with Abraham would continue through the line of Jacob. Which brings us to our story tonight. Tonight we're going to look at the life of Joseph, who just so happens to be Jacob's favorite son. He has quite a few, but Joseph is his favorite. And tonight we're going to have Kirsten read for us. So I invite you guys to join with us in Genesis chapter 37 and follow along with us.
Genesis chapter 37, Joseph's dreams. So Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan, where his father had lived as a foreigner. This is the account of Jacob and his family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended to his father's flocks. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, but Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than they loved the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. One night, Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. "Listen to this dream," he said. "We were out in the field, tying up the bundles of grain. Suddenly, my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine." His brothers responded, "So you think you will be king, do you? Do you actually think you will reign over us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. Soon Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. "Listen, I've had another dream," he said. "The sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me." This time he told the dream to his father as well as his brothers. But his father scolded him. "What kind of dream is that?" he asked. "Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what the dreams meant. Soon after this, Joseph's brothers went to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem. When they had been gone for some time, Jacob said to Joseph, "Your brothers are pasturing the sheep at Shechem. Get ready, and I will send you to them." "I'm ready to go," Joseph replied. "Go and see how your brothers and the flocks are getting along," Jacob said. "Then come along and bring me a report." So Jacob sent him on his way, and Joseph traveled to Shechem from their home in the valley of Hebron. When he arrived there, a man from the area noticed him wandering around the countryside. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "I'm looking for my brothers," Joseph replied. "Do you know where they're pasturing their sheep?" "Yes," the man told him. "They have moved on from here, but I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph followed his brothers to Dothan and found them there. Joseph sold into slavery. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. "Here comes the dreamer," they said. "Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." When Reuben heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. "Let's not kill him," he said. "Why should we shed any blood? Let's just throw him into this empty cistern here in the wilderness. Then he'll die without our laying a hand on him." Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to their father. So when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. Then they grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. Then, just as they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance, coming toward them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain by killing our brother? We'd have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." And his brothers agreed. So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver. And the traders took him to Egypt. Some time later, Reuben returned to get Joseph out of the cistern. When he discovered that Joseph was missing, he tore his clothes in grief. Then he went back to his brothers and lamented, "The boy is gone. What will I do now?" Then the brothers killed a young goat and dipped Joseph's robe in its blood. They sent the beautiful robe to their father with this message, "Look at what we found. Doesn't this robe belong to your son?" Their father recognized it immediately. "Yes," he said, "it is my son's robe. A wild animal must have eaten him." Joseph has clearly been torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes and dressed himself in burlap. He mourned deeply for his son for a long time, but his family all tried to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted. "I will go to my grave mourning for my son," he would say, and then he would weep. Meanwhile, the Midianite traders arrived in Egypt, where they sold Joseph to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Potiphar was captain of the palace guard.
Thanks for reading for us, Kirsten. So this passage is really one of my favorites in the book of Genesis. I think Joseph's story is really cool. It's a really good story that shows God's provision for us in our lives. The life of Joseph is definitely not all rainbows and roses, although it starts out that way with his coat of many colors. But we see that Joseph is forced to experience many different highs and lows in his life. But what's important to note is that in each of these situations, God provides for him. In this chapter, we saw Joseph get sold into slavery, but what happens next is God's hand is on Joseph. And he works so hard and is so good at what he does that Joseph becomes second in command in his master's home. Now, while we see this may seem like a positive in Joseph's life, it's a really short-lived positive in that ultimately his master's wife begins to tell lies about Joseph, so much so that his master gets really upset with Joseph and throws him into prison. And so, like I said, lots of highs and lows. But while in prison, Joseph has the opportunity to share one of his abilities that we read about in chapter 37, his dream interpretation. And while in prison, he gains so much recognition for his ability to interpret dreams that he ultimately gets the opportunity to interpret Pharaoh's dream. And so again, we see God providing for Joseph. And after interpreting Pharaoh's dream correctly, Joseph becomes Pharaoh's right-hand man. And it's really encouraging to read about the life of Joseph because often it's one that we can relate to today. You know, our life doesn't always work out and go the way we think it should. But we can use Joseph as a good example that even when we find ourselves in situations that seem less than ideal, if we trust in the Lord and continue to serve Him faithfully, He will provide for us even in those hard times. And so oftentimes these hard times are unfortunately necessary to get us to the point that God has planned for us. You know, Joseph's life took a lot of twists and turns to get him to where he was the right-hand man to Pharaoh. And when you see what happens next, you see that God orchestrated each and every part of Joseph's life to have him in this position when a massive famine hits the land. And due to Joseph's position of power, he's able to provide for his family, for God's chosen people during this famine and get them the resources they need to be able to have food during this shortage. And that allows Joseph and his family to continue to be a blessing to others and to continue on in that promise that God made to Abraham and his descendants. So I know many times in my life, I go back to the story of Joseph and remind myself about God's provision in his life. You know, I feel like a lot of times I'm not really in the positions I saw myself being in at this point in my life. And sometimes I feel like I'm not really able to use some of the abilities that God's gifted me with to their fullest potential where I am now. But then I remind myself of Joseph and the provision that God had in his life, and that oftentimes in his life, he wasn't where he thought he would be. You know, he was his father's favorite son. You know, he had a great outlook on life before things started to go south. And it wasn't until he found himself in prison when he was really able to use the gift that God had given him of interpreting dreams to its fullest potential. So that's what's, you know, awesome to me about God's story. He can literally use us at any time and any place to bring glory to his name. We just have to make sure that we're faithful to him and continue working each step of the way. So after looking at these different things from tonight's passage, I want to take just a few minutes and look at some questions to go along with our study tonight. So our first question tonight is, do you think there's anything Joseph could have done to change his situation? You know, we see that his brothers become really jealous of Joseph and the love that his father has for him. And they feel like, you know, he's getting unfair treatment, so much so that they decide they're just going to eliminate their problem and sell Joseph into slavery. You know, and it's even a gracious option at that, because initially they wanted to, you know, kill him. So do you think there was anything Joseph could have done to change his situation with his brothers? Oftentimes, you know, we can look at the life of Joseph early on and we kind of see, you know, him proclaiming this grand dream that he's had as how he's going to rule over his brothers. And it's easy to try to think, well, he could have been a little more humble and a little nicer to his brothers when he was sharing his news with them, or he could have, you know, kept it to himself maybe and not had to go out and proclaim just how awesome he was going to be one day. But what do you think? Do you think there was anything Joseph could have done to change his situation, or do you think that, you know, God lined out things to play out this way so that he could bring Joseph to this point in his life for the purpose that God had for Joseph's life? So, and then our next question is, do you think God can really use any situation for his glory? We see in the life of Joseph that he finds himself in many less than outstanding situations. And do you think that's true in the life of Joseph only, or is that something that could be true for us as well? are there any times in your life where you've seen God was able to use maybe a negative situation or a time when your life took a turn that you didn't think it should, but God was able to use that to bring about glory to His name? I know that happens in my life several times. I went to college and graduated with my degree to find myself working in a job that doesn't require a degree. And so there was many times throughout my time in my current job where I felt like, this was almost a negative situation. But time and time again, I see the Lord reveal to me that this is exactly where He has me to be. Very early on when I started at this job, one of my coworkers came to me and asked me to start a small group with her son. And she said, just based on, our interactions and the way she saw that I lived my life, she wanted her son to have an influence in his life like that. And for me, that was just, God pushing me and encouraging me to step out of my comfort zone and to take advantage of this opportunity that He put right in my path. And so, oftentimes I look at this job that I have and the path that my life was on to get me to this point, and I think, this isn't really what I saw for my life. But then God shows me that even in these situations that don't really add up to us, we see God's working them out to bring glory to His name. So I encourage you guys to share some examples like that from your life. If there's different times when God has taken a situation where you thought only bad things were going to happen, and questioning how God even led you to this point, for Him just to show you clearly that this is why you're here and this is what I had planned for you. So feel free to share those down below in the comments with us. And let's move on to our next question. And our last question for our time together tonight is, how do you typically respond when you see God working and His plans coming together? A lot of times for me, I mentioned last week that I tend to question and want to observe and study and analyze different things in my life to the nth degree. And sometimes that becomes a stumbling block to me, but when I really see God's plans start to come together, it really encourages me and kind of gives me that extra push to step out and to really do what God's called me to do. A lot of times I'm able to see, if things hadn't played out just like this, I wouldn't find myself in this position or have this opportunity. So it's in those times when I can really rest easy that, God is behind this and God is leading and guiding my life and getting me to the point where He wants me to be, so that He can use me to bring Himself glory. And so I find it really encouraging when you start to see the different pieces that God has in place fall together, and the picture really becomes clear to you. And it just makes it really easy for you to step up and just do the simple task that God has for you. And ultimately it's going to bring glory to His name, and it just gives you that glimpse and that little bit of part that you get to play in God's big story. So I encourage you guys, if you have different examples like that where you feel like all these different plans God has for your life really start to fall together, and share with us how that made you feel and what you kind of do once you start to see the plan come together. Does it encourage you? Does it make you nervous? Does it make you feel like, I don't want to mess this up? Feel free to just share your thoughts down in the comments below. And so after looking at these questions, I want to take just a couple minutes here before we wrap everything up to give us something to reflect on this week. This week, I encourage you guys to reflect on the fact that while there are hills and valleys in our lives, God is always with those who love Him. So this week, whether you find yourself down in a valley or up on a hill, I encourage you to cling to the Lord. Seek Him out and ask Him to make His plans known to you, and strive to follow those plans wherever they lead, no matter the circumstances. I know right now a lot of us would identify our current circumstances as difficult. We have these restrictions in place that allow us to not do what we really want to do. And I encourage you that while this time is difficult, trust the Lord and know that He has a plan for us in all of this, and strive to serve Him even through these difficulties. And I look forward to seeing what He has for us on the other side of all of this. Thank you guys for taking the time to join us for our life group study tonight. I pray that you guys have a good week this week. If you have any prayer requests or any encouraging stories to share with everyone, feel free to leave a comment down below so that we can encourage each other and be praying for each other during these difficult times. Next week we'll be in Exodus chapters 1 and 2, so I encourage you to look ahead and read through those to prepare for our study next week. Thanks guys, and have a good week.